Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this live session. My name is Manny Fragilis, and today we really have the honor of having Jacob Norris, who's a senior environment artist at Naughty Dog, recently fresh off the press on Uncharted 4, which is destroying records and has some of the best reviews, for one of the best games of this year. So we're gonna just kind of jump into it. First off, I'd like to say that Jacob is going to be doing a class with us at CGMA. This class is Unreal 4 modular environments. Towards the end, Jacob is going to just go through what the class will consist of, and I think that's about it. So without further ado, Jacob, take it away.
Hey everyone, so as Mandy said, my name's Jacob Norris. I'm an environment artist. I also do textures, and some of you might know me as Pure Polygons or Jacobo777 on Polycount, and I love making video games and artwork and all that kind of fun stuff.
Cool. All right. So also tell us a little bit about just your background in terms of companies you've worked at, projects you've worked on.
Yeah. So I worked at actually Insomniac Games right out of school, and when I was there, I had the opportunity to work on Resistance 3. Environment artist. I was just started out as contract actually, which I think a lot of people do right out of school. Started out contract. They hired me on full time, and from there, was lucky enough to work at Kojima Productions in Los Angeles, where I worked on Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. I mostly worked on the Metal Gear Online section of that. So I don't know if any of you played that, but it's a fun game. Check it out. And then most recently at Naughty Dog, been working on Uncharted 4 and doing some of the single player and multiplayer and kind of bouncing around between working on environments and textures for all that. And if anyone's interested, I went to the Art Institute of California for my school, and that's most of it.
All right,
I won't go into childhood details or anything like that.
No worries, dude. I think that's great. So I guess we'll just kick it off with kind of giving us an overview of your workflow. What's a basic pipeline, for an environment artist at Naughty Dog?
Okay. Well, so there's kind of two separate workflows. There's the life of like the texture artist, and I'll kind of cover that one first since that's my official title. And as a texture artist, you'll usually work pretty close by with an environment modeler, and the workflow starts off with basically the modeler will get like a block mesh from the designer. The designer is going to lay out the gameplay and where the player is going to be like running to and where the enemies are and such. And so this scene here would kind of look just like I don't know if this archway would even be here. It would just be like a flat gray ground and maybe some walls to show where the border is. And during that time, once he hands it over, then you'll talk with your modeler and kind of go over, like based off of the concepts and the reference for the level, what types of textures you'll need. So you'll start working on rock textures and ground textures and grass and snow. And while you're starting off on your textures, then the modeler is going to go in and he'll start blocking this in with more final meshes, like creating actually some of the rocks in here that can be placed along the edges and creating some of the architecture that's in the level and the artwork. And after he finishes up like a certain amount on the level while you're working on all your textures, then he'll pass it off and you can start actually texturing the models that he's worked on. And then he'll just kind of jump around to the next section and you'll start working on that once he finishes it up. And so that way you're not stepping on each other's toes and getting in each other's way. And it's just a kind of a balance of making sure you're thinking ahead and keeping open communication to get things moving properly. And that actually kind of covers both workflows, I guess. So all in one go.
Cool. So if you could, go into more details as it relates to, what, from the beginning, what are some of your, how do you draw inspiration for some of the environments that you're going to be creating, and are you provided artwork?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of inspiration for the artwork that I create, at least, comes from just looking at other artists online. I mean, that's a huge one for me, just because seeing like all the amazing work that people are creating out there keeps pushing and motivating me to want to get better and better to keep up with the rest of the industry. And it's I almost feel like at some point, how much better can things get? Like with the way artwork's looking in game these days, it's pretty tough. But you keep pushing yourself and keep talking with people and seeing what the latest tech and workflows are out there. And then the next question you had mentioned after inspiration.
Yeah, are you getting so when you're launching an environment, what are some of the assets you're given? I know you mentioned that you're sometimes giving like a block model or a proxy model from the a level artist or level designer. But what other assets or information you're giving from art? Are you provided with artwork, concept art? Is it just references, photographs?
It's kind of random, like depending on when you jump on to the section. And like I said, if you're going to be the modeler or the texture artist, like I'll just give you examples based off of the environments I have here. But so for this one, actually, I just jumped onto it more towards the end, and Andres Rodriguez and Anna Cho had actually done some amazing work in this area already. And so this is like a section where you kind of just have to jump in and say, all right, there's a lot of the artwork already here, but I need to make all these architectural textures here. Let's see what else is already in the scene. Let's see what other textures are already created. Let's check out like the concept art that the artists have provided, and then just do your best to make everything integrate and work together. So like in this area, I got some ambient occlusion based moss around the edges here because there's some beautiful greens and foliage around. And so to blend in some of those colors, you can just start blending it into the architecture also and making everything really complementary in the scene. So that's just one example that you can jump onto something that's already pretty far along. And
in a case where there's something that's just brand new, haven't really been thought out.
Yeah, so this scene here, this is the Scotland multiplayer, and this is a scene that I got that was 100% just block mesh. There was like no art in here at all, and it really is just talking to your concept artist a lot. If you ever need concept, like if you're having trouble coming up with ideas for an area, then just make sure to say, hey, I really need like some help coming up with a way to make this look more interesting here, or how would this integrate to this part of the environment here? Like here in this scene, there's actually 4 or 5 different types of areas within the levels. Like this is like a graveyard section, and here's like a really rocky sort of archway, snowy cliffside. Then there's a massive cathedral over here. There's even like a cave section. And so when you have so many different types of areas like this, that's definitely important that you talk to your concept artist and make sure that the transitions between these spaces are going to look natural, and you don't just have like this harsh, cave right here, and then it goes right into an entrance for a church. So, like, I don't think people would put a church entrance on the inside of a cave. So it's a little bit of looking up real world references and how things connect to each other. And then it's also adding in your own artistic touch and asking for help when you need it.
Cool. So what was your favorite environment that you worked on Uncharted, and why?
I would say my favorite environment would probably be these Madagascar Stairs section. that we shared in the E3 demo last year, just because it was so much fun finding the reference for this and coming up with the ideas for this place to make it feel realistic, and also just because this environment is just crazy. I don't know if any of you have played this section, but you're just coming through here with the car and things are flying all around. You're hitting boxes and smashing into pumpkins and fruit and all kinds of stuff. I was talking to Manny. It would have been funny if we put some Easter egg in there, like maybe you run over an Xbox or
that would have been pretty sweet.
Hit something else in there like that.
Exactly. And you're mentioning, but you do have a couple of Easter eggs as relates to the artist that worked on the set, right? You want to share that with us? Yeah,
there is a little Easter egg. I'm sorry, the same one. So there's a little Easter egg that it's not in any of the pictures, unfortunately, but if you go through the section again, it's right around here in this kind of center courtyard area where the little string lights are, but there's a street sign right there. I don't think we can see it. I might be able to zoom in. Yeah, the images are too small, but there's a tiny street sign right here that has the combination of my last name and the texture artist's first name, because I did kind of a mixture of modeling and texturing in here. And it's just called No Row because it's Norris and his name is Rogelio Alguin. And so if you see any street signs throughout this level, there's all kinds of names that have just been mashed together because Rogelio went through and put like all of our names and the environment modeler and the texture artist together. But he did his best to try to make it sound like it's a name from Madagascar. Yeah. Not sure if No-Row sounds like Madagascar, but
No-Row. Right on. So can we see some of the, like an actual environment? Obviously it's like, I know we can't see anything from Uncharted, but like, an actual scene file with some of the environment that you've put together.
Yeah. So I'll share, I'll first share, like, I don't know how many of you have seen like the procedural nature environment that I had worked on. It's up on the Unreal Marketplace, and it basically is just a really awesome tool that allows you to create like rivers and spline created trees and such. I'll open it up. I think I have it right here. Yeah, and I'll just make it full screen. But basically, most of this scene and all of the foliage is actually created with splines. And so you'll see here I can grab like this tree and then just select a spline point, and then I can move the tree however I want and change like an entire root. And then now this root's gonna like come into the water, go across the water. I make a little bridge for it here. But this is what it looks like actually running in the engine. And you got like vines and grass, and this river here is kind of the same thing. It's like set up with splines also. And this entire environment I made from scratch. So it like all the textures and the models and the foliage and the water and all that. And as we continue to talk about it, I can always share workflow for something like this too. I don't know if I'll be able to go into all the details for the technical aspect, but I can share as much as I can at least.
Cool. No, definitely. Could we see the wireframe for that environment?
Yeah, no problem. So this one is a bit more dense just because I really wanted to show off the artwork as much as I could. I go to wireframe. So you'll see like I even have the terrain is fully tessellated in here, which it's very, very dense. You wouldn't usually run a game like this, especially on a console, but for purposes of sharing the environment, it really helps a lot to get little rock details and cobblestone and mud that actually gets pushed out of the ground. And the cool thing about real-time tessellation is you can actually increase the density or decrease the density and really just make it like as high quality as you want, or as smooth running and better frame rate as you want.
Cool. Speaking of resolution, is scanning, is like, 3D scanning objects, is that a part of your workflow? Did you guys deal with a lot of scan data at Naughty Dog?
Well, I can tell you at Naughty Dog, we don't use, at least on the environment side, we don't use almost any scan data at all, I think.
Okay.
All the environments were created with good old classic artist sculpting and time and love.
Yeah. So no photogrammetry or anything like that?
Not that I think of. Like for all the people that I worked with and all the texture artists I talked to, like, we haven't used any scan data at all. The character artists for a lot of the clothing, though, they definitely really pushed the photogrammetry and brought in like a lot of clothes and real world references that they'd scan in and then clean up later on. Okay,
cool. So have you worked with scan data in terms of just your own personal process, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely tried it out because I do. It's a very conflicting thing for me because on one hand it can make some beautiful stuff, of course, but on the other hand it's beautiful because it's pretty much just real life.
Yeah.
So it's very conflicting as an artist that, like, at what point is it still art, I guess. But I do think that it's a great piece of technology, and we will be seeing it a lot more in video games. So it's definitely something to learn and give a try and see how you like it.
Cool. And for some of the scenes that you worked on, like, you mentioned that is it not the Switzerland scene, but the crazy cathedral scene. If you could pull that image up, what's the resolution like for a scene like that? Like, what's the poly count?
Okay, yeah. So I'll just go to this one here. Yeah, so this is the multiplayer level, and I believe actually our poly count on this was between 1.5 to 2.5 million tries on screen at any one time. And we really, I think for Uncharted 4, like, at least in the single player, we had a lot of freedom on the poly count. The poly count was a lot less restricting actually than textures and shaders. Textures and shaders were a lot more expensive with all the blends and all the features that would be applied to it. And when you have like 3 or 4 normal maps layered on top of each other, when you start vertex painting, that's what would get expensive. But yeah, poly count was about 1.5 to 2.5 million. And considering I was using
that? I'm sorry. Continue what you're saying, Jacob. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that basically, considering a lot of assets I was trying to take from single player and manipulate to make it into a multiplayer version and retexture it, etc. There was a lot of LODs that had to be created for multiplayer, and usually for multiplayer there is a lot more optimization that needs to be done, just because there's so many players on screen at any one time, and it's all has to be done over the network. So it's like more information needs to travel across the internet. So if you work on multiplayer and you can do your best to make it look good, then definitely props to you.
Right on. So who keeps, speaking of just poly count, so who keeps track of draw calls and poly count? Like, does that fall within your department, or is that?
Yeah, so it's usually falls on top of the modeler, because like I mentioned before, at Naughty Dog, there's generally a split up workflow between environment modelers and environment texture artists. And so the modelers will generally focus more on optimization and bug fixes when it comes to the actual geometry. the texture artists, depending on their background and how capable they are with models, etc., then they can always help out and take any of the assets that the modeler can't get to in time and help optimize.
Okay, cool. And for an environment like this, how many LODs are there, typically?
It really depends on the asset. Like for this flag, that was a really simple model, and even from far away, it's not going to be a ton of polys, so you don't really need LODs on that. But for something that's a lot more dense, like all these rocks, all the rocks here were very, very dense, and so they all needed probably between 2 to 3 LODs. And the first LOD, like the closest one, would be between 6,000 and 8,000 tries. Then it would drop down to like 2,000 or 3,000 tries for the second LOD. And then for the furthest LOD, you try to get that as low as possible because it's going to be all the way in the distance. And as long as you can see a nice silhouette, that's all that matters.
Okay, cool. And so since we're talking about, just the modeling resolution, what does texturing resolution look like?
I think our standard on this was actually about 1024.
Okay.
So generally our textures would be about 1024. And if it's a simple detailed tile like this little grunge pattern here, or even some of the masks would drop down to 512, or at the lowest like a 256. But we didn't really have many 2048s, I don't think. Like that was usually reserved for characters, for hero props and vehicles and things like that.
Okay, and how many unique like tileable textures you would say that's in an environment like this?
Oh my gosh, that's definitely a tough thing to gauge.
If you
yeah, I mean, I would have to guess in like my range is going to be very wide, so be prepared.
Yeah.
Between
from 5 to 1,000.
Yeah. Somewhere in that range sounds good.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
I don't know. I think probably around 200 or so, like between 150 and 300.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that typical? Is that for each environment, or does that does that obviously scale, or is adjusted based on the how large an environment is?
Yeah, it's not even necessarily based on how large the environment is. It's really based on all the different types of artwork that are in the scene. So like I said, since this multiplayer map had 5 different themes throughout it, it definitely required more textures because you needed all the rocks theme, you needed the architectural theme, you needed like the distant mountains theme and all the foliage theme. And so there was a lot of different themes in here, and the only way to get something like that working on a console is to really pick and choose what textures are important to you. How can I reuse this texture to make it work on 5 different rocks or like on 6 different wall pieces, and really doing your best to just be efficient.
Yeah, so there's a considerable amount of planning that obviously goes into to this. Is that just on you as as the professional environment artist, or is that something that there's someone else that kind of oversees that? And in film, it would be like a VFX supervisor, right?
Yeah.
Or a CG supervisor. So how does that work?
Yeah, the thing that at Naughty Dog is, to some people it might sound really awesome and like I would love to do that, and to other people it might be a bit scary. But basically, we have a lot of freedom to either succeed and do amazing, or fail horribly if
crash and burn.
Crash and burn. So they give us a lot of leeway to really be artists and like to really be ourselves and manage ourselves and take care of the optimization and texture counts and material counts and all that. Of course, it's kind of like they're always your safety net. If you do need help, you can always go to them. It's not like, oh, you're not allowed to talk to this guy. Like he can't help you out. It's really up to you how much help you need and how confident you are in your ability to plan ahead and make sure all this does work together and fits in memory. And generally, I guess a good rule of thumb is if no one has come to talk to you to tell you that something's wrong, then you're doing really
You're doing
well.
a good job.
Yeah.
No, right on. So what's the textile density? Since we're talking about texturing.
Okay, yeah, we didn't necessarily plan like a specific textile density for this. You would basically have like I said, all the 1024 maps across the level, and then a good way to help everything kind of feel like it's the same resolution texture-wise is incorporating detail maps into a lot of your assets. Like the snow on the ground here, I believe I have a close-up picture. So this has a detail like sparkle map on it that even if you get really close, you're going to see this small 512 sparkle texture that's tiling across the whole snow, and that helps the thing to feel dense and like it has a good textile density. And it's the same thing with the rocks. There's like a rock detail that is across all these different rocks here. And it is also about just making sure when you're scaling assets that you're not scaling a tiny little rock on the ground and turning it into a massive rock on the wall or like a cover piece or something, because that's going to totally screw up your textile density. And it's also a big help to have the QA testers, because they'll actually look for things like that. Like if some wall piece or some cover piece is really low resolution, and for whatever reason you didn't catch it, like maybe you're having a bad day that day or didn't eat your lunch, then they'll help you out and be like, hey, you got to fix this texture, fix this resolution over here, and make it look better.
Cool. And how do you make your textures? Is it a material layering or?
Yeah, it's generally a lot of shader work. Like I mentioned, you kind of plan it out beforehand. So for this cathedral here, you would essentially create a brick texture because you know you need bricks, and then you'd want to have like an overlay plaster on top of it. But you would just make those as two separate textures, because then that way inside the engine with our shader network, you can just vertex paint plaster on top of the bricks and blend together things really nicely so that you don't see the tiling textures everywhere. Like right here, we have the tiling brick, and then it's blended into like a broken destruction texture along the edges. And this is actually, some of these textures are taken from Jeremy Huxley at Naughty Dog, and some of the modeling is from Adam Littledale, and there were some awesome artists that worked on the single player. And then, like I mentioned, I would kind of take their assets and rework the textures or create new ones, and had to definitely do a lot of remodeling because multiplayer has very specific needs when it comes to cover pieces and placement of geo. Okay, cool. And obviously, it's like, it's something that I know is a continuous theme that you've mentioned. It's definitely a collaborative effort, right, when working on some of these large environments. Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially like multiplayer, and when you're working on levels that already have a lot of good artwork, you don't need to make something new every time. Like, I think at Naughty Dog, we've got 200 or 300 brick textures, just different types of bricks that people have made over the years, and Zbrush files. And you guys have mastered the art of bricks and rocks. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, why do I need to make a new brick if there's already 200 bricks to choose from? And I'm sure one of them looks awesome, or two of them look awesome. Yeah, and honestly, talking about bricks, it's like it's just texturing. Substance, I would imagine, plays a huge role in your workflow. So could you talk about that a little bit? Yeah, especially like lately, with all the new tools that Substance is sharing, and Substance Designer and Substance Painter has just been awesome. A lot of the snow was like a a procedural texture that was created, just using different like noise patterns and all the different nodes that you can hook up into there. Some of the bricks and actually most of the rocks and a lot of this is still sculpted in ZBrush first, just because, I mean, especially for rock faces and the actual shapes of the rocks themselves, like Substance can't do that yet. You can get a nice tiling texture on there with Substance, but ZBrush definitely still plays a big part in our workflow also, for the modeling and for the base normal maps that are used to give the general silhouette and look of the models. But it's just kind of finding a balance. Like, you know, if it is a good texture candidate that can be entirely procedural, then go for it. But if that's going to take more time than just sculpting something really quick, feel free to use ZBrush too. It's not like you have to just stick to one tool all the time, you know?
Yeah. So Substance played a huge role in just, and not just with you, I would imagine, just the overall process.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely were artists that used entirely Substance, and actually a lot of the Madagascar City and the Stairs, like Rogelio Alguin, like I mentioned, was the texture artist in this area, and I think almost everything in here was procedurally created inside of Substance. I textured these tarps and such. Those were not in Substance, just because they were all unique, and I decided to texture those with Photoshop. That was when I was first starting out there, and I hadn't used a lot of Substance still, but I think they turned out pretty good still.
And so, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to continue saying that. Yeah, definitely, like almost this whole section. So if you definitely check out Madagascar and the Madagascar City like market escape scene with the vehicles and stuff, that's tons and tons of Substance.
Cool. And how are the environments created? Is it just straight ZBrush sculpting? As you mentioned, I know you guys don't use any scan data, but are you using any third-party terrain generation tools? Is that something that's built into the engine?
So, actually, we do not have any terrain tool really at Naughty Dog.
Old school.
Yeah. We work entirely inside of Maya, and I don't know all the technical details of how that integrates into our engine, but we do have to hand model basically our whole terrain. We have to hand place all of our foliage, so it's not like Unreal where say I sculpt on the ground here, and you can see the foliage will actually move up and down with the terrain. And unfortunately, at Naughty Dog, we have to hand move all the foliage as we're doing that. So it's not sculpting right now for some reason. I might be on the wrong landscape actually. But yeah, so if we model something new or adjust the terrain at Naughty Dog, so say a designer asks for changes, then if we had already placed all of our foliage, then all that needs to be updated.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds
painstaking. Look at how easy it is to just populate. So that would take like 4 hours to do.
Wow.
Luckily, there's some new tools that have been starting to come into Maya. Andrew Maximov has been our tools guy over there, and he's been helping a lot to create easier ways of populating worlds, but it still can take some time.
Yeah. Man, it's I guess it's a testament to just the quality of art you guys produced on this, right? To know that that's all hand sculpted, and you guys are not just just kind of painting these massive terrains.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like while it does take longer, it is actually kind of satisfying in some way when you really can hand place like each little piece of grass and such, because I mean, as an artist, isn't that what you would want in the long run? It's just to have the full control over it, and just, I want this one blade of grass coming out of this tiny crack right here, exactly there. So, or maybe that's just me
with a little grasshopper on top of it.
Yeah. Maybe that's just me trying to justify the fact that I have to hand place all the grass.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. Yeah, you're not crazy. You're not crazy at all. No, as I said, it's like, it's. I think it's amazing. I remember Frank. It's like on some of the images that he had posted. And so I was looking at the level of detail for the stubble, right? On the characters, and I'm like, oh, it looks like they're individual cards for each hair. It's like, what were you using? It's like, just kind of sculpt that or to place that. You're using, Zbrush. It's like, fiber mesh or something. And he's like, no, I placed each card.
Yeah.
I know you say that, but no, what did you really do? Like, what was your technique? He was like, I placed each card by hand for the stubble. And I'm like,
no, absolutely.
Good God.
I mean, I would walk over there to hang out with Colin or Frank, and I would just see them moving a single plane of hair on their characters, just tiny bit to the left, a tiny bit to the right, and
rotate.
Yeah. So that's why the hair looks so good on those characters, is because every single one.
That's an understatement.
They were like literally playing God and building these characters by hand. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. The work, it's on a whole new other level. So, we're talking about these tedious, tasks that take so long. How long does an environment, like some of the ones you've shown us, how long does that take to put together?
Well, so let's go with this one here. Since it was kind of the team effort of me and the modeler, Henry Chang, it took about a month and a half to maybe 2 months to get this to where it is now. And that's not starting from scratch. Like I said, this does use some textures and some models that were already from other artists and other sections of the game. And that is always the hope, is that you have a lot more to use and a lot more to reference from. Of course, if this was created from scratch, I would say creating all the textures for this and all the models and geo for it, maybe with 2 people working on it, like 5 months, perhaps 6. But that is one reason why a lot of sections later on in the levels can use so many more different themes and so many more different styles, because it doesn't all have to be made specifically for that. We are able to draw a lot from what's already created there. And so it's kind of just, like I said, dependent on what's available to you. On like the same end of the spectrum, starting from scratch on this multiplayer level, it was started, I think, in October, and I didn't sign off on it as being finished until about February. And this one was, like I had mentioned, this one was all me in sense of I did the modeling and the texturing and the optimization and shader work for it. And there were, again, some assets I could use from single player, but most of it, or a lot of it, had to be created new specifically for this section. And so, how many months is that? Like 6 months again? Yeah, 5 or 6 months. So yeah, it's a range. It depends on the size of the environment, what's available to you, etc.
Yeah. So as it relates to the foliage, getting back into that, just so I'm clear, that's all hand placed?
Yep. So all the little pieces of grass and the trees,
the shrubbery,
all these little guys
the
around
bushes.
the edges here, the rocks, this whole thing is all hand placed. I'm having PTSD flashbacks.
Yeah. You start twitching. Man, that is as I said, it's definitely impressive. It's definitely impressive. What other softwares? I know you mentioned Maya, you mentioned Substance. What other softwares do you guys utilize to create some of these environments? Obviously, ZBrush.
Yeah, ZBrush is a big one. Marvelous Designer actually was used a lot for all the tarps in this area. So that's all Marvelous Designer there. There's another tool that you can get for Maya called Ninja Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
That one's pretty cool. That one helped us to create all these telephone wires because you can essentially just place a locator and say, here's the start point, here's the end point, and bam, just make a wire for me. And like you set the gravity and the scale of the wire, etc. So that was a huge one for telephone wires. Other than that, yeah, I mean that's most of them. Maya, ZBrush, Substance, Marvelous Designer, Ninja Dojo,
just
Photoshop.
good old artistic grit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, it doesn't necessarily matter which program you use. It really comes down to the foundation of your understanding of the artwork and the skills behind that, because you can always learn new tools. Like that's something if you just put enough time into it, you could always learn the new tools. But really having that base understanding of the artwork and what looks good and what colors work together is what's going to help the most in making your scene actually look the best.
Yeah. And it shows. It shows. It's such a beautiful game. So in terms of your, when you're creating like, some of these assets, it's like, so are you starting, in ZBrush first and then going into Maya and kind of, retopologizing, or are you in Maya, creating a base mesh, then going into ZBrush? It's a two-part question. How are the LODs generated from that process?
Okay, yeah, so most of the time, at least as a texture artist, you would basically just get a model from your modeler, and using that, you would decide if it can just have a tiling texture applied to it, or if it needs to be sculpted. Like, for example, these little blocks here, you would get this small block, which is just an additional concrete sort of sidewalk piece. And if it can just have a tiling texture on it, go for it. But if not, then you may need to hand sculpt it and get like a unique one-to-one texture on it. And so from there, you go into ZBrush, sculpt it out, put some chips in it, some cracks, make it look good. Then you could texture it in Substance Painter, because that's usually a lot quicker for something that you just sculpted in ZBrush. Go through there. We have like our library of different materials and textures that we can just apply to it and paint on top. Then for other things, like I said, sometimes if it's just a big ground piece, you could really do whatever you wanted. Like if you are more comfortable sculpting a nice brick sort of tile texture for the ground in ZBrush, go for it. If you want the freedom and flexibility to be able to create a huge variety in Substance Designer, then you can do that too. It's different for each artist. Like some of the artists don't even want to stop using ZBrush. Like they're like resistant to the whole Substance coming of age. Yes. And even me, it definitely takes a while to really get into that Substance workflow, because the nodes are very different from what most artists are used to. Just being able to slap on some nice alphas and brushes and get some fun sculpting and really that organic feeling of art creation.
Exactly. And how do you do with how do you generate LODs? Is that by hand or is it automated?
Yeah, so I believe in the beginning we had to do it just basically with the Maya reduce option. You just click reduce a couple times. And
so is it similar to like decimating, like, Decimation Master or something like that? Or?
Yeah. Simply Gone was another big one. Eventually, we did have tools where Simply Gone was incorporated into our workflow, and we could just click how many LEDs we want, the distance at which they would fade into each other, and then just set create, and it would like set up your LEDs for you. But a lot of those tools are just starting to come into play over there.
Okay, cool. And so how do you determine texture resolution for foreground, midground, and background elements?
Well, definitely foreground and midground receive the most love. For the background, since you're never really going up to these mountains, it's generally not using a lot of shaders because you don't want it to be expensive, and then it's also trying to get it as low resolution, both geo and texture wise. Like, I think I have an example here. So this was like a cinematic in the game, and you only actually go up into, you can only actually see this little section of ground here because someone gets thrown out of a van onto the ground, and like the camera angle gets pretty close. And so you can see I placed a lot of tiny little pebbles and tiny little details that really need a lot more resolution and a lot more density to them because they're right up in the camera, especially for cinematics. But then these guys off here in the background, they just use simple tiling texture. It's just like low res geo that's just all smashed together to make it look like there's possibly a mountain there. And then it just has like a 512 or a 1024 texture that's just tiling on top of it with a little bit of moss vertex painted around the edges. So focus all your texture memory and detail definitely up on what's actually seen in your level, and push everything else in the background to be as much like optimized and as low as possible.
Cool. Is there a decal system, or are you guys just using more blend materials?
Mostly blend materials. There was decals implemented towards the very end of the project, and so we had like a mad dash to just say decal paths, and just everyone was like place decals wherever you could, but most of the time it was just blending. A lot of blending.
Yeah. And how do you guys maintain consistency in color and in style throughout these levels with so many texture artists involved?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the tough part, and that's where like the art director would come into play the most. Is generally, like I said, the artists have a lot of freedom to do what they want, and hopefully they will do a good job of making all their textures and shaders complementary to the other artists. But in certain cases, if something needs to be changed or updated to better fit into a scene, then like the art director will come in and point it out and say this needs to be more blue or more red, or it's too noisy, etc. And then I personally feel like the lighting does a ton, especially with a lot of the environments I've seen at Naughty Dog. Like the lighting is key in getting the overall mood and colors into the scene. Like this scene here with this really nice dusk sort of lighting, when you put a blue sky in there and then the light's just coming down directly from above, it looks completely different, and it will sometimes pull the different assets away from each other and make them have that contrast that you don't want, that don't make them feel as complementary. So it's definitely a lot of lighting that helps out.
Cool. And how much of the lighting is baked in, and how much of it is, you would say, is real time?
I believe that we definitely do like a bake on the whole level and try to reduce the amount of real-time lights to as low as possible. I think the sun itself does have some real time, especially because it needs to have all the shadows for the trees, the players, like any vehicles, etc. So there is always at least the sun as a real-time light. And other than that, I think if you're inside, then you have a lot more freedom to place more real-time lights, just because when you're inside, then you could keep the distance that the lights expand off to a smaller range so that they're not conflicting with each other. Because when you have multiple lights in a scene and they all have to cast shadows and they're all right next to each other, that definitely hurts, and you can't add as many. So it's kind of just depends on the rest of the environment. If you have very dense geo and textures and a lot of effects going off, then you don't want a lot of real-time lights because it's going to hurt the scene. And if you have like a very simple scene, then feel free to place more. But that's definitely more up to the lighters. I haven't done too much lighting over at Naughty Dog because those guys definitely know what they're doing compared to me. So I just let them do their job.
They do some. It's as I said, it's all a team effort, and man, it's they definitely make your environments look amazing, right? Really helps take it to that next level. So
I don't think I had any complaints with what they did.
Exactly. So so do you use any specific albedo value ranges in your textures?
Yeah, I mean, not specific. Oh, it can't go below 243 or 40 in the saturation range, or nothing specific. It's again a lot of that. Well, there are tools for that also. Like within the engine, we have something that we can check our blackness and whiteness levels. That if something's getting too dark, it'll start to turn red and show us like, hey, this might not look good in all scenes just because the texture's getting too dark. And same thing in the lighter range. Like you never go pure white, you never go pure black, basically. Generally, as long as you stick in the middle range is always a safer bet.
Okay, cool. So if you could pull up one of your environments, I have a question as it relates to modularity and how that exists within a level.
Okay, yeah. I have my modular building set here also, which for those of you that are interested, I made like a blog post and a little breakdown. You might have seen it already on Polycount. But yeah, just on my website, purepolygons.com, and then under the blog section, I have a little breakdown for the modular building set that I created. And it walks you through the process of creating tiling textures for the scene, setting up those tiling textures on your assets, creating like modular pieces, and how they all end up fitting together, like with different textures and different layouts in your scene. So yeah, feel free to check that out. I'm trying to post like new blog posts once a month at least, maybe more in the future, but just of breakdowns so far that I've got, and hopefully in the future, simple breakdowns of other artists and anyone else that wants to contribute. I'd love to put a ton of information on here for people to come and just check it out.
Cool. And there's one image in particular that you had shown as it relates to the other scene, the jungle scene that you had put together with the river. Did you show that image and talk a little bit about that?
Which?
This is the one where it had all the different components, the individual components that made up that environment.
Oh yeah, I believe I do have some pictures of that on here. Let me see. Oh, that's actually on my computer. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. There's some work in progress type stuff, and so not a lot of people usually see this, but sometimes I'll share it here and there. So these are just some work in progress shots. This is like the Rock. Not Dwayne Johnson, but this is the Rock in the scene that I had, and it's the only rock, basically the only boulder inside the whole scene. So this entire scene is made up of just this one rock, scaled and placed differently with like world space normals and detail maps on top of it to make it look good. And this is just kind of an early sculpt, almost done. Like I just still have to do a detail pass and cracks on it and such. But sometimes I'll just do that in Substance or another program to get the fine details inside of there, and generally just do the main big shapes in ZBrush. This is very, very early on in the environment where I'm just testing out the terrain and seeing how the shader applies, how the spec is looking, the lighting, and trying to figure out how to make this spline system work with like the trunks and the tree. And I have a little helper who's watching and hanging out as I'm going along. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing over there?"
What's going on? What's going on? Dang, looks good.
Yeah, and I just, as I'm going along, I'm testing out the spline system. And basically the spline system just uses a small chunk. I don't know if I have a picture of that. Maybe on poly count. I don't know if you mind if we go over there really quick. So I shared that this is basically what all the trees are made of. It's just like this tiling asset. It's just a small piece of geo that connects to each spline point across the whole tree. And so as I pull the spline out, it duplicates this model between each spline point on the spline and allows it to bend and fold and create all the different shapes you see. And then here's just more like continuing, starting to get some rocks in there, starting to put the tiling textures and the moss on top of there, getting some mud and the different terrain layers that I'm going to start blending together. As you can see, this guy doesn't want to leave me alone. He just keeps hanging out all the time.
He's your muse. That's what he is.
Yeah, exactly. And then I started working on the river. Like once I had a good idea, as you can see, foliage is usually the last thing I place. It was the same thing on Uncharted, especially because, as I said, with Uncharted, when you change something, you have to change all the foliage with it. So you'd want everything else to be done before you placed any foliage. Otherwise, that's a lot of work. And so here, I just like to get all my silhouettes and main forms in first, like where the river is going to be flowing to, the banks of the river, how the rocks are starting to form on the edges. And then with the water, I start getting more foam in and started enhancing the shader to make it feel more realistic, getting distortion in the ground underneath the river. Then I started adding foliage. And so from this point, I started creating the grass actually with fiber mesh in ZBrush and just captured an alpha from it and textured that. The leaves were created in ZBrush also and textured in ZBrush and Photoshop. And then now I started adding branches on and getting more and more foliage, more and more grass, and more composition into the scene. And I'm playing around with lighting at this point. And this guy just wants to say hello really quick. He's like, "Don't forget about me. I'm still here."
Love it.
And then it's after this, like I have the general look of the scene, the general layout that I want. And from here, it's mostly just tweaks and continuing to place more rocks, changing the lighting, updating the sky to something that looks better or different. And this is just a quick example showing how all the trees are created from splines and all the different spline points connecting. Like I said, there's a new model piece connected between each spline point. And then in just a moment, I think my hard drive is going a little bit slow right now for some reason.
Okay. Well, we'll
there we go.
Okay, cool.
Actually, it's just loading something, but apparently I can go through the pictures just fine. That's weird. But yeah, so then this is like the mud that I created for the scene. And this is just to blend between the grass mud that you saw. And then if I get rid of the puddles in here, it's a nice dirt that can also be blended in. And here's just some more screenshots of the textures of the scene, like the tiling rock texture, tiling cobblestone, tiling tree bark, tiling mud, tiling grass. This is some of the assets that the scene was created from. And so originally, I was going to create more rocks, but I never finished these guys and just ended up using the one, like I mentioned, and just applied different textures to it, basically. But you would never know. It looks the same. And then these are some small rubble rocks that I placed along the riverbanks and such, some twigs that you can place in the level, and some more dead, faded grass, and some more alive kind of green grass. And there's the texture again, a close-up. Some of the tree branches and grass. And this is when the scene's almost done. So at this point, I've got a lot of the lighting sorted out, a lot of the assets are placed, and I think I'm just tweaking my vines here because they kind of just look like weird splotchy things hanging from a rope. They weren't quite done yet. And it's coming a little further. I'm changing the lighting, playing with the lighting again, like I said, because now everything's in, so I can see what the scene looks like with different lighting environments, different looks.
Now, obviously, for this scene, you're not, because you're using Unreal, you're not creating all that foliage by hand, correct?
So I created all the foliage by hand, but luckily I can place it really easily with the foliage tools that I showed you before, where basically you just have this kind of dome, this half dome thing, and you just select whatever plants you want or you don't want. And so like I can say I only want to place this banana leaf for now. So I'll just get rid of all these other ones, uncheck them. And so now basically I would only place banana leaves everywhere. Yeah. And you just paint it. It's really easy, and you can change the density and how close together the banana leaves you want them to be. And if you want to select multiple like I had before, you can select different grass so that it populates next to each other. And the foliage in here was really easy to place. It was pretty quick. I kind of just went across like the ground with this thing and then removed parts of it where I wanted paths for like something to walk on, or, rocks to be, stuff like that.
Which is a great example of, at the end of the day, it's really the artist, because, you know, an environment like this, which is, yeah, you created or modeled each of the individual assets, but then you're using the software to place it, versus what you did on Uncharted, which is completely hand placed, right? At the end of the day, it's the artist, because both of them look amazing. So,
well, thank you very much. I mean, I did my best, I guess. And that is again the thing that, like, even though I'm not hand placing all these, you can still try to be specific or try to do a little bit more yourself on deciding where there is and isn't foliage. And if you want to get super specific, I think you actually can grab the foliage with this select tool and move it around and place it by hand too.
Really cool. So let's get into, we have tons more questions. We are, you know, not going to be able to get through all of them, but I know there's been a lot of questions as relates to advice, tips and tricks for, you know, aspiring environment artists, right? And so for students interested in environment design or environment arts, what tools would you recommend them use to gain an industry-ready understanding of environment creation?
Okay. Well, I think you definitely need a few tools in your arsenal. So you need a modeling tool, and that's really up to you if you want to use 3ds Max or Maya. But those are the two industry standards. I can tell you that I've used Maya at every single studio I've been at so far. Naughty Dog, Insomniac, and Kojima all used Maya. That's just my experience. I know that there's definitely people that have used Max, so be prepared to learn both. ZBrush is huge. Like even with Substance playing such a big part in tiling textures, you still need ZBrush to create your shapes, like your rocks, the broken building sides, architecture, statues, like all that stuff. Still, definitely learn ZBrush. It's still really big, and we, like I said, we still even use it a lot at Naughty Dog.
Are you referring to ZBrush or?
Yeah, ZBrush.
Okay. You guys don't? Yeah. Do you guys use Max, or is that something if someone was, more Max, heavy or knowledgeable, could they use that as well? Is it open that way?
I don't think so. Just because all of our tools are integrated into Maya. And
okay.
Yeah, I don't. Like I said, Maya's kind of our engine there almost. Like we do all of our work, our placement, all of our scenes are done inside of Maya. So I don't think we could use Max, unfortunately. Like if you wanted to use Max to model a one-off prop on the side, then you could. But I don't know if it's good to be able to be flexible. And if the studio uses Maya, you definitely should try to learn it, because that's going to be very helpful. And you may run into more problems later on. But so Maya, ZBrush, Photoshop is still good, at least if you're not going to use it for texturing anymore, to be able to touch up screenshots if you want later on, or do quick concepting, adjust values. Like if you just want to take a picture of your scene and see what it would look like if it was a different color really quickly, or add this or add that. Photoshop's still good for that sense. Substance is the big one. That's like if you can get really good at Substance, people are definitely looking for artists that know how to use it now, because not a lot of people at all the studios are using it yet. Like it's starting to become bigger for sure. But I can see studios are integrating Substance into the workflow a lot more. Both Painter, mostly Painter, and if you can get good at Designer, then you could be a specialty to like a studio, because you can create a lot of the smart materials that the artists will be using inside of Painter.
Cool. Do you guys use Houdini at all for any of the asset creation?
I haven't used it personally. Like throughout my whole career, I never had to use it. It's another one of those things that if it's something you want to try, if you want to learn it, you could be like a good asset to a studio. That if you could use Houdini and find a way to integrate it into the studio's workflow, then that's something that I'm sure a studio would look for. Other than that, yeah, those are the main ones, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that covers most of them. What do you look for in a texture artist portfolio that would make a good candidate at Naughty Dog?
Definitely organic textures and bricks. Bricks and plaster. The main thing is just that you have a good eye for your composition within the texture, the colors within the texture, and that you take each texture to as far as you can. Like Naughty Dog really seems to like people that have a lot of passion and push themselves to be like the best that they can be. They even they'll even tell you their art test is a huge part of the interview. If you can make your art test and your artwork look good, that's what they want. They want artists that care and that are willing to take that next step and to push their artwork to like whatever the industry standard is, or past the industry standard, even if you can. Like that's just going to take a lot of time and practice and effort, and there's unfortunately nothing that's just like a tool you can use or something quick. It's a lot of the background, like I said, that the understanding of the artwork is where it really comes from. Lighting, composition, colors, and just that eye for it. Yeah. So if you just want to study a lot of art, like study a lot of other artists and see, you can start to tell the difference. Like if there is a good artist out there and a bad one, you'll see the difference between them. And try to pick up on that. Try to pick up on why this one's better. Like pick it apart. What makes it better than this other artwork, you know, and push yourself to try to get to that.
Yeah, nope, that makes sense. And so for someone just starting out in 3D as a student, do you have any advice, you know, for them?
Don't give up. I know, you know, it can sometimes be overwhelming or challenging, and you see all these other artists out there, and it's like, even still for me, all the time I'm seeing artists and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't even want to work anymore. These people are just too amazing. It's tough. And so don't give up. Like try to just use that as motivation to keep yourself going. That's the big thing, I think, is if you have that motivation and that passion, then you'll eventually get there because you'll want to learn the tools. You'll want to become a better artist, and it needs to come from that passion. Like, I don't think anything else is really going to get you there.
Yeah.
So that's,
okay. I think
that's
that
the
makes
main
sense.
thing. Yeah. And also make connections, like talk to people, and when you're at school, like try to get into groups where maybe you'll have lunch challenges. Like at lunch, let's see if we can make a texture in an hour. Like let's both work on this texture for an hour, or let's both try to model this thing in like an hour. Just doing a lot of personal work and stuff on
Like
your
lunch,
own time.
like, you know, the lunch crunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Exercises.
Lunch crunch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
But I still think, I was just going to say, I still think in some ways that comes from that passion and motivation, though, because if you're passionate and motivated, you'll find others that feel the same way. You'll put in the time, you'll put in the effort, you'll do these lunch crunches, and it all just really comes from that.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And in terms of the, like, what do you show, right, for an environment, you know, for an environment artist, what pieces should they have in their portfolio?
So try to focus more on quality compared to quantity. Like even in my portfolio, I had left out a ton of stuff because I think a lot of people say this, and my instructor said it in school, but your portfolio is only as good as the weakest piece that's in it.
I love that. I love that saying.
So don't just throw everything you have in there like, oh, I did, you know, this and that and did this thing. Show like I really did this. This is the thing that I put a ton of time and love into, and I made it my best piece. And then if you have a piece like that, you can just take parts out of it and break it down and make a whole portfolio out of that. Even like if you just focus on a diorama, like this environment right here was just made up of just a few pieces, like I showed you. And you can take apart those pieces and make a portfolio out of it. Like take these textures, this moss, the grass, the leaves, the ground texture. It could be a whole portfolio piece. Just pick something that you really like, something that's not too ambitious, something that you can actually finish, and just pour all your love into it. And usually that piece will be centered towards something that's similar to the style of the studio you want to work at. So if you want to work at Naughty Dog, definitely go for something organic, something with like ancient ruins, overgrowth, architecture. If you want to work at like Bungie, get a lot of nice sci-fi, a lot of cool shapes, really interesting, like techie type stuff. Yeah, and I think that's the way to go. Like, make something you're really passionate about, and you can pick parts out of it and include all these different things in your portfolio. And that's even sometimes just one environment with a lot of different pieces to it is enough to get you a job if it looks amazing. Yeah,
I think that's one of the things students underestimate, which is really tailoring your portfolio to the company that you're interested in, right? So it's like, you know, if you're interested in working in a place like Naughty Dog, it's like you see the type of level of quality that they're expecting and the artistic style that they would like to see, you know, and doing, obviously you don't want to copy something one-to-one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to show some sort of artistic initiative, but you know, there's a lot of brick, you know, and whatever you're going to be doing, there's going to be a lot of trees. There's going to be a lot of shrubs, you know, a lot of
even just Google like Naughty Dog art.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
just see what comes up, you know, like
Exactly.
here's some great stuff right off the front. You know, it's always a lot of this overgrown kind of decayed sort of look to it with most of the stuff that we work on.
Yeah.
A lot of nice colors and greens and good stuff. Like, yeah, just find something. And like Manny said, don't necessarily make it exactly like the scene. They do want to see, like, character can add a lot if you have your own style. Or not necessarily style, but I guess your own touches that you add to it.
Yeah. And Alex is saying, yeah, but you don't always end up where you want to be, which is true. And the idea is not to have your entire reel be just a bunch of trees and everything. But the point is, the point is, it's like, just if you're applying for Naughty Dog and obviously you're going to have multiple environments, it's like, just start off, lead with the one that you think is more applicable to that company, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, like, so
don't undersell yourself or like don't discredit yourself before you've even tried. Like, don't say, oh, there's no way I'm going to get into Naughty Dog, so I shouldn't even try to make artwork for that. Like, that's not what they're going to look for. An artist, they want an artist that's going to say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make it my best, and keep trying. Like I said, it comes from that motivation again, that if you can motivate yourself and you make enough in nice environments and you try enough and practice enough, then you'll get there.
Yeah, exactly. And so how much level design do you need to know in order to be an environment artist? Is that a part of the the role or the responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, it plays a part, at least in the sense of knowing, like, a player can't take cover on a golden sphere, or like, a sphere is never a good cover piece.
Yeah.
And it's just simple things like not having or watching for lines of sight, making sure there's not trees like blocking where the player is supposed to be able to shoot, making sure that assets you place together are arranged in a way that the player is not going to get stuck. But you don't necessarily need to be like a full-on level designer for sure. That's the designer's there and he's going to help out, or she's going to help out, and it's just, you can always ask them questions like, hey, can I change this? Can I add this? And just share your ideas with that open communication again.
I completely agree. And so, let's talk a little bit about the course. And this is based on another question. Since Naughty Dog separates artists into modelers and texture artists, will this course focus on one more than the other? And I mean, I think Naughty Dog, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jake, is unique in the sense that it's one of the studios, one of the handful of studios, game studios, that does separate that, those two components as it relates to environment art, right? Where you have just texture artists and just, modelers working on environments.
Absolutely. It is the first studio I worked at that does separate the two into two different like workflows and styles like with that. So with the course, it's going to be covering the process from the blockout mesh to creating modular pieces. So all the modeling aspect is going to be there, as well as the texturing. It's going to be the full shebang, like an environment artist sort of haven of everything you need to hopefully get started in making art in Unreal and making art for games.
And could you take us to just a breakdown from week to week, what the class will consist of, what students should expect to get?
So there is like a general guide right here that kind of shows what each week's going to be. But it starts off where reference always is huge. Like, so we cover how to look at reference, how to pick it apart. Then we'll start laying out our foundation to the scene based off of the reference that we have, the concept we're going to work off of, and creating a simple blockout similar to how you saw my nature scene starting to come together with just really simple shapes. And similar to how Naughty Dog works, where a designer gives you a block mesh and then you kind of model over it. Then week 2, we're going to start going into Unreal already, just to start getting the assets in, making sure they're snapping all together properly, like that all the modular pieces work together. And we're not going to run into weird scale issues where like this piece is 1.21 and this one's 1.5, and then they don't like sit next to each other properly, and you get like seams, and so it covers that. Week 3, start looking into the textures, breaking up our reference into tileable textures, unique one-to-one textures, what's going to be good for Substance or Photoshop or ZBrush. Then week 4, we just cover making textures in Photoshop, like the classic way of creating your albedo, roughness, metallic, and specular. Your normal will generally come from your sculpt or the high poly. Then building the textures in Substance is week 5, so we're going to cover Substance and how to create tiling textures in there while adding bits of story to it, like scratches and rust and decay, and making it feel like a texture that has had a life, you know. Then week 6, we're going to start using that modular assets and pushing more of that idea of modularness with instancing meshes even while you're modeling to work from like a kit bash sort of library, as well as how to apply some of the textures we started making to modular meshes and making sure you don't see seams. And then week 7, we're going to start covering shaders in Unreal. So I'm going to break down the really confusing shader networks in Unreal and how all the different nodes help and play with each other to show vertex painting, creating material instances, and making the world feel less tiling by adding the vertex painted and different shader techniques. Then week 8, we're going to go into like the secondary details that really start to make the environment feel lived in, like the props, any additional overgrowth on top of your scene, or kind of little details like lamps and, I don't know, doorknobs or whatever else that would start to bring the scene to life and make it feel more realistic. Then week 9, we're going to go over lighting, colors, and composition, just to start setting up our scene. Like now that we've got most things in and it's a lot more final, at this point we can finally piece it together into something we can start taking screenshots of and putting into our portfolio and sharing with people. Then week 10 is just taking everything we've learned and doing our final touch-ups to the scene. Any parts of the textures that need updating, any color tweaks that need to be made, doing the final propping pass of the scene to really get all those details in, all the vertex painting, and then taking your screenshots and composing them for your portfolio, making sure you get your name on there, your website or your email, so that people, no matter where they get the picture from, it's always going to have your contact information on it. Just because like when you share a picture, it's usually passed around a lot and you don't always have the description below it. So it's just good on the picture itself to have some kind of contact info or something to say that this is yours.
Cool.
And yeah, and so hopefully by the end of the class, you'll have like a finished scene and some nice portfolio screenshots to share and start looking for work.
Cool. One of the questions I had is, are you required, is having an understanding of Unreal required before this class? Is that a prereq?
So I would definitely say it's good to at least have opened it up and check it out. I'm going to do my best to try to cover all the parts to it that's going to help you to create the environment, like I mentioned, showing the lighting and showing how to import assets, create your shaders and materials. But it's always good to at least have had looked at it before, so it's not entirely new when I open it up.
Perfect. So we're running out of time, and we have we have a ton more questions, but
Okay.
unfortunately, guys, Jacob needs to get back to work. But Jacob, thank you so much for just this amazing session, and it's a thank you for sharing with us just your workflow and some of the amazing stuff that you've created on Uncharted 4, and yeah, we look forward to more stuff from you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for this opportunity. And I hope it helped you guys a bit. And if you're interested in following along with whatever work I do in the future, you can find my work on facebook.com/purepolygons.
Cool.
And I just post all my work up there, as well as the website, like I had mentioned.
Perfect. And everybody, thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for sticking around. Those who are taking your lunch break to be in the session with us, we thank you. And we'll see you guys for the next session.